There are many formatting options available to make a schedule view more legible and enhance its usefulness as an editing tool. In this movie, we will take a look at several ways to manipulate the way that our schedule is grouped, sorted, and displayed. I have a file here on screen called Modifying Schedules. I have it set up with two tiled windows, a floor plan and a schedule side by side. If you want to understand how I was able to open and tile both of those, you can go back and review the Adding Schedules movie, and we went through the steps there. So the first thing I'd like to do is click on my schedule view to make it active, and I'm going to click the title bar right here. And you may notice that the ribbon changes when I do that. I'm going to click back to the floor plan, and I'd like you to watch the ribbon. Notice how that jumps me back to the View tab on the ribbon. That happened to be the last tab I was on. And then if I click the schedule, I get a new tab, Modify Schedule Quantities, and it gives me some buttons that have to do with the schedule. So pay attention to that. That tells you when you're in tiled windows which one is active by clicking the title bar of the View window. Now, when the schedule is active, if we also direct our attention to the Properties palette, we can see that we're seeing the properties of the schedule itself. Okay, in this case, schedule, furniture, and then the rest of the name kind of trails off there. If you watch the Adding Schedule movie, then you remember we had a 5-tab dialog that came up when we were actually creating the furniture schedule in the first place. We only addressed the Fields tab at that time, and I mentioned that we can go back at any time and make modifications. And this is the way we would actually do it. So here on the Properties palette, you can see each of the 5 tabs listed and an edit button next to each one. So you can jump right to the tab in question that you want to work on. And the first one I'd like to show you is sorting and grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and click edit there. And again, this dialog should look somewhat familiar, particularly if we were to click over here. This is what we saw in the Adding Schedules movie. And now we're going to focus our attention here on sorting and grouping. So the first thing we need to decide is, what do we want to sort by? If I move this out of the way, I've taken the liberty to go in and input a type mark for each piece of furniture. So it might be handy to sort the list in order based on those type marks. So we're going to go ahead and open up the list, and you'll see each of the sortable fields listed. We'll go ahead and click type mark, and that's all we really need to do. Let's just go ahead and click OK, and you'll now see that everything is sorted both alphabetically and numerically. But let's go ahead and take that a little further. Go back to sorting and grouping. If you want, it's not necessarily appropriate in this case, but we might see some variation, particularly since we have so many C1s. You can add a header, and I'll add a blank line too, just to give it a little bit more space. So not sure that that really helps us with the items that we have fewer items of, like the B1s and the B2s, but you can see that the Breuer chairs, it's maybe a little helpful, makes it a little more legible, maybe some of the nightstands and so on. So in this case, I don't think that helps us a whole lot, but just showing you what some of the options are. Now, let's say that it makes sense, and in the case that I have, it doesn't really make sense, but I just want to point out you actually can sort by multiple fields. So after you choose your first field, you can sort by a second, a third, and even a fourth field. I'm not going to do that in this case, but you might want to do that in some of your projects. So I've turned off the header here, and I'm going to add a grand total at the bottom. So let's go ahead and click OK and see the result there. Now I left on the blank line, so it doesn't put the number at the top, but it does leave a little space between each group of items. And again, you can decide whether you think that's more legible or not. But here's the grand total down at the very bottom. So it's telling me I have 26 total items, and if you want to manually count and verify that, you certainly can. I'm willing to trust Revit on this point. Now, why don't I see a count in the count column? And then you might also be asking yourself, do I really need to see 4 separate instances of nightstand listed out, or however many Breuer chairs this is? So let's go back to sorting and grouping one more time. And if we uncheck this box right here for itemize every instance and click OK, we now get a much cleaner list, and you'll see 2 things change. Instead of seeing 10 separate instances of the Breuer chair, we see 1, and then the count over here has changed to reflect the total quantity. Now we still end up with 26, and certainly we could total it up and see whether or not that number matches or not, but we could even go a little further here. And if we need a separate total in that count column, we actually can do that. We can go to the Formatting tab, we can highlight Count, and we can check this box right here. Now, That might make a little more sense to do in something like an area column or something like that. The count really is going to match the same as the grand total, as you can see, but it will put it right underneath that column. So if you'd prefer to have it right there, you can certainly do that right there. So those are some examples of how you can group and sort. And I should point out that this is still a live view. So if I select the C1 chair item now, you're going to see all 10 Breuer chairs highlighted in the model at one time. So this can be both a really powerful thing. It could also be a really dangerous thing, because if you were to do something to those 10 chairs right now that was undesirable, you'd be affecting all of them, like, oh, I don't know, delete or something like that. So be a little careful, okay? But depending on how you want to use your schedule, sorting and grouping can really make that schedule a little bit more useful for you. So by sorting and grouping your schedules in various ways, you can make the information more readable, easy to digest, and in cases where you're using it as a selection and editing tool, you can make it easier for you to make quick and easy selections of the items in your model.